Five, four, three, two.
Shalom, shalom, brothers and sisters. Giving honor and praise unto the Most High, the Creator and the Maker of heaven and earth. My name is Yeshaya Yisrael of the tribe of Dan of the nation of Israel. This particular presentation, brothers and sisters, if we will, we intend, brothers and sisters, for this to not be very long. Nonetheless, what we are going to do, what we intend on doing, brothers and sisters, in this presentation regarding the fact of the land of Israel not being in the West, the land of Israel, brothers and sisters, being in the East, is the matter that we will address in this presentation. So, as stated, giving honor to he who created all things, the one who sees all and is not seen, the one who judges all and is not judged. Let us continue, brothers and sisters, in this particular matter. Introduction. Shalom. This presentation is because some speak on the matter of Israel, the land, being in the Western Hemisphere. We want to point out that the land of Israel is not in the Western Hemisphere. The land of Israel is not far from Egypt and is not far from Arabia. Eastward, the country is bounded by Arabia. To the south lies Egypt. On the west are the Phoenician and Mediterranean. Northwards, it commands an extensive prospect over Syria. What we just read, brothers and sisters, in this particular part right here, right? We are going to take the time out now and underline this. This, brothers and sisters, comes from Tacitus, the Roman historian who spoke about the location of the land of Israel. And according to this guy, by the way, who did not like Israelites, so you kind of have a way of being able to show your point, even from people who don't even like you. So now let's look at this right here. It says, eastward, the country is bounded by Arabia. To the south lies Egypt. We want to emphasize, brothers and sisters, about the aspect of the south part being Egypt on that. On the west are the Phoenician and Mediterranean. Now, we also, brothers and sisters, in a presentation that was done called The Madness in Saying the Land of Israel, or is the madness in saying Israel, the land, is in the West or in America. We pointed out that the book of Numbers, chapter 34, speaks of the Mediterranean, meaning the Mediterranean Sea being on the western part of the way the land of Israel is. So just as the Bible talks about in Numbers 34, so can we begin to sit there and see even a secular source, if you will, Tacitus of Rome that spoke upon the same matter. All right? So, Shalom, brother Dorayahu Ben Dora. All right? It says this. Let us go on. Genesis chapter 12, verse 10. And it reads as follows. And there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down into Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was sore in the land. Now, it says here, Wahi Ra'ab Ba'aretz, Wayered Abram Mizraimah, La'agur Sham, Ki Kabeh Hara'ab Ba'aretz. Now, let's emphasize something right here. When we look at this part, we're going to color code this, all right, for the moment. Let's color code that red, if we will. The word Ra'ab means hunger, but in this case, it's translated as the word famine. All right? Now, and there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down into Egypt to sojourn there. Now, to sojourn, we're going to look at this word right here, Lagur. All right? And we're going to color code that, if we will, this color here. Now, let's show this part right here, bold. Lagur, that lamed in the beginning, making the L sound, shows it to be the infinitive. Gur comes from the root word gar, which means to live or to reside. Now, in Judaism, they try to translate that word meaning to convert, but it doesn't mean that. And this right here is an example of how that word doesn't mean such, because Abraham did not convert to becoming an Egyptian. So that's just something we want to point out, if we will, in that particular case. All right. Now, when it says the stranger that sojourns among you, that's not talking about by translation by saying the convert, as some poor translations try to say. But now, getting back to the point of what we're talking about and going over a little bit of the language. You see this part right here that we're going to bold part? That last mem in hey, Mizraima, Mizraim, generally understood or translated as Egypt, right? Mizraima, brothers and sisters, the word Mizraima means to Egypt. That letter we see right here, and we're going to color code this so we can get something of the language itself, right? Let's color code that one blue. That ma, that at the end with that, with the mem, shows it to be that in that particular case. So if there's any questions concerning this, please feel free to put it inside the comment section, and we're going to move on from that particular case. All right. Shalom, Yirmiyahu Yehuda, and Shalom, Sarah Michaela of the house of Judah. Thank you. Let us continue on, brothers and sisters. What do we want to point out? Abraham went down into Egypt. So now let's go back here. If this is saying to the south lies Egypt, and then here we see that Abraham went down, just like people say they go down south. He had to go down, he had to go south in order to get to Egypt. So let's go on. Isaiah chapter 30. That walk to go down into Egypt, and have not asked at my mouth, to take refuge in the stronghold of Pharaoh, and to take shelter in the shadow of Egypt. Haholkim la redet Mizraim, upi lo sha'alu, la oz, b'ma'oz, par-o, walak, sot, bezel Mizraim. Now this word right here that we keep on talking about, bold. We're going to bold this, right? Bold. Mizraim, we already understood, means double straits, but the Israelites called that particular land that because of what they experienced there. The people who were referred to as the people of Mizraim, they didn't call themselves Mizraim. The people who were referred to as Egyptians, they didn't call themselves Egyptians. They had their own name for their own selves. All right. So these are genes that we just want to point out for edification purposes. Now, as we go along, right, let's look at this. It says went down, bold, and we're going to color code this one, brothers and sisters, purple, if we will. And we're going to color code this, if we will, brothers and sisters, purple, right? We want to get that Y sound into that as well. Now, brothers and sisters, why do we want to go over the directions? Is because we want to show that there is no possible, logical, reasonable way to say that the land of Israel, which was formerly known as the land of Canaan. The Bible tells you that in Leviticus. Genesis chapter 12, verse 6, it says, when Abraham went to that land, brothers and sisters, it said the Canaanite was in the land. So what became known as the land of Israel formerly was known as the land of Canaan. So if we are going to say that that land is over here in the west, we're going to have to identify who are the people, the Canaanites. The Canaanites were Hamitic by national origin. Of the sons of Noah, the people of Canaan descend from the line of the Hamim, or the Hamites. And we're going to talk about the Hamites in this presentation, if we will. So let's go on, brothers and sisters, in this particular matter. Right? Now, let's remember this and color code this purple. Not all of that. Sorry about that. We want to color code this purple and get back to it for a reason. Remember that we're color coding that particular case. Right? That walk to go down into Egypt, Let's remember that. Next slide. Genesis 25. And these are the names of the sons of Ishmael by their names, according to their generations. The firstborn of Ishmael, Nebayot, and Kedar, and Adil, and Mibsam. Now let us remember, brothers and sisters, Nebayot, we're gonna highlight that or bold type that, and Kedar. Let us remember, brothers and sisters, as stated, Nebaot and Kedar. And there's a reason why we want to remember these particular names of the children of Ishmael. We'll see as the slides go on. Next part, please. Notes. Now we're going to, brothers and sisters, all right, extend this here, if we will. And then we're going to read it to show what we were talking about, brothers and sisters, for edification purposes. Let's go on. The Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, in his account of his Arabian campaign, mentions the Kedarites in connection with the Arabi Arabs and the Nebayot, mentioning donkeys, camels, and sheep as booty. Kedar is mentioned in Aramaic inscriptions and on two silver bowls from a shrine at Tel el Mashkuta, east of the Nile Delta. Now, why do we want to point that out? The Nile Delta is in the land of the east. It says right here that Kedar, right? We just read, Salika, excuse me. We just read that Kedar is who? Where does Kedar come from, brothers and sisters? Ishmael. Ishmael is the son of who? Abraham, aka Abraham. So Kedar by default is the grandson of Abraham. Now, it says that Abraham, excuse me, went into the land of Canaan. When he got into the land of Canaan, it says the Canaanite was there. So if the Canaanite was already in the land, and then we see later on, brothers and sisters, the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, speaking of Kedar, who is of the line of Ishmael. How do you get the Western Hemisphere in that? Is my question. Where is Assyria if Canaan / later on Israel, and if Kemet, aka Egypt, is in the west? How, brothers and sisters, is the Assyrians talking about the people that the Bible's talking about? And we just see it right here in the Nile Delta. The Nile Delta is not in the lands of the west. That's why it's important to go over these kind of matters. Next slide, brothers and sisters. Joshua 22, verse 7. Now, to the half tribe of Manasseh, Moses had given inheritance in Bashan, but unto the other half tribe gave Joshua among their brethren beyond the Jordan, westward. Moreover, when Joshua sent them away unto their tents, he blessed them. What do we want to point out and underline? No, we're going to color code this one. I pick purple to color code westward. Now, let us read the Hebrew and go over. Follow the arrow, brothers and sisters. Walakatzi shebet ham nashe, Natan Moshe Babashan, Ul ket yo, Natan Yahushua, Im achehem, Be'eber, Hayardain Yama, Wagam ki, Shilkam, Yahushua, El Ahalehem, Barakain. You see this word right here? We're going to bold it, and then we're going to make it purple. That word Yama, I'm going to take the time out now. Underline, no underline, underline, no underline, underline, no underline. So those who are following the video can begin to see that word Yama is the word westward. Why does that become important? Because the word Yam also means sea. So let us go back in Hebrew and see what we're talking about for reasonable purposes. Remember, we went over this here, and we're going to bold, not bold, bold, not bold, underline, not underline, underline, not underline. So remember Mizraimah, that ma, at the end of the word Mizraim means to Egypt or into Egypt. Just like Shemaima means to the heavens. So now in Hebrew, so now when we get to this part right here and we start talking to Yamah, we see underline, no underline, underline, no underline. That Yam to Yamah means westward or to the west. Shemayim, heaven. Shemaimah, to the heavens. Beit, house. Beitah, home or to the house. So that showing in this case as a suffix in Hebrew means to whatever. That's what we want to point out. So we have Manasseh, half of them is on the east side of the Jordan, and half of Manasseh on the west side of the Jordan. Why does this become important? Because if one is saying that the land of Israel is in the land of the west, the book of Joshua is a bold-faced lie. The majority of the book after Deuteronomy, if America is the homeland of the land of Israel, is a lie. Was the book of Joshua a lie? Or did people on Facebook, Instagram, two places where you don't need to sit there and cite a bibliography? Fake book, no disrespect intended, for those who do know a brother wrote a book. You got to cite a bibliography. You can't do what the guy Dr. York did and just sit there and tell people, oh, just go on and research it. Your book needs a bibliography. Your book needs footnotes. Your book needs some kind of citation, and it doesn't take nothing away from you as a brother, as a man, as a sister, or a woman, a more, male teacher, or a mora, female teacher, to cite your citations. You look more credible when you do that, brothers and sisters. So with that, let us continue in this case here. We want to emphasize the Jordan. And what do we want to emphasize in this particular case? There are three principal sources of the Jordan. The river Hasbani, which rises in a large mountain fountain on the west slopes of Mount Hermon. It's supposed to have the word N, sorry. All right. At altitude of 1,700 feet. The Ladan, which gushes from the celebrated fountain under Tel El Khadi or Dan at the altitude of 500 feet. The river Banias, which issues from an immense cavern Banias at Caesarea Philippi, having an altitude of 1,200 feet. Now, why does all of this become important? Because it's showing you the Jordan River, where it starts, where it goes through. Let us show this for edification purposes, because we just read about the Jordan right here in the book of Joshua 22. It's worded right here, and we're going to bold it, not bold it, bold it, not bold it. Let us remember this word Yarden, meaning Jordan, and we're going to get back to it for a reason. All right? The Jordan River. It is important to know the waters of an area. By knowing the waters of an area, we can gain how the people did irrigation, fished, and sailed. In the video that was done called The Madness is Saying the Land of Israel is in the West, I went over the book of Ezekiel 47 about how people were going to be doing fishing in the area that we're seeing right here, referred to sadly as the Dead Sea, which should be called the live sea. The Dead Sea, as it's incorrectly called, truthfully called the live sea by many Israelites, right? You just float because of the volume of salt that's in it. So we see Sea of Galilee. This is over by where Dan is in the north. And then it goes south. The Jordan River then goes into what's called the Dead Sea. Now you have Jordan over here and Canaan over here. That whole area became known as the land of Israel, brothers and sisters. In light of that, if we will, it flows south, if we will. That becomes important for edification purposes. Let us go on, if you will, to the next slide, brothers and sisters. The Jordan River. I want to show this again. The land today called Palestine was called such by Hadrian of Rome. He died in 138 AD. The nations wanted to do all they can to rid the memory of the Israelites from the Holy Land. Excuse me. In time, the people will be put back in their land, and the land will have the true Israelites on her. Now let's look at this, brothers and sisters. We have here the Sea of Galilee, the Yabok River, the Dead Sea, the Jordan River, the Yarmouk River. These rivers are mentioned in the book of Joshua. You read about the Yabok, brothers and sisters, in the Bible. Where can you show in the West where those lands will be? The Jordan River divides the land of Israel from the west, from the west on this side by the Mediterranean. Let's go back, if we will, right? It says here, on the west are the Phoenician and Mediterranean. So now when we go and look at this map, for instance, we see the Mediterranean on the west. We went over in the other presentation about Numbers 34, verse 6, which speaks about the Great Sea. Daniel chapter 7 also mentions it as, quote, the Great Sea. So what sea will they be talking about? I'm going to put in the description, brothers and sisters, the link to that video that we went over citations. And the name of that video, for those who are interested, is called The Madness in Saying Israel, the Land is in the West. And there's a part 1 and a part 2 to that. That's going to be put inside of this description when this video is uploaded. Now, getting back to this one right here now, right? Hadrian, after the Israelites done called it from Canaan to Israel, Hadrian changed that and called it Palestine in honor of the Philistines to help rid the name of Israel from it together. So what you see going over here, Gaza, what you see going over there in the West Bank, and then Jerusalem and the lands today, they are always going to be at odds, brothers and sisters. Because you know where the true house of Israel is? The bulk ran into Africa. The bulk that ran into Africa was eventually brought over here to the Western Hemisphere. The black man is landless in the West, and the true house of Israel is scattered from their land. And the true land of Israel is vacant greatly of her true inhabitants. So here you have a people that's not in their land, and then you got the land that doesn't have her true people upon it. Then you have people in the land that are not of the house of Israel, fighting to hold on to a land that, no disrespect, doesn't belong to neither one of them. The Philistines were mixed in with the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. That's how you get today's Palestinians. The Palestinians are a mixture of Europeans and Hamite Philistines. In the presentation before, we went over that the Philistines come from the land of Crete, Kaftor, if we will. That's in the Mediterranean, not in the Western Hemisphere. Let's go on. Now, earlier we spoke on this and said that Egypt, Abraham went to Egypt. Joseph was brought into Egypt. Jeremiah went to the land of Egypt. We read earlier about Israelites going into the land of Egypt, whether it was a good idea or a bad idea. Israelites went into the land of Egypt. They had to go south to go into the land of Egypt. We wanted to show the land of Egypt. We wanted to show that the word Nubia is from Nub, meaning gold. The biblical lands of Cush/Cush, whether with a K or a C, and Havilah or Kawila, mentioned in Genesis 2, is in continental Africa. So Nubia that we see here, ancient Egypt, Upper Egypt, Lower Egypt. Now let's look at this. Why, brothers and sisters, Tameri, Tamehu. The Nile River flows north. The way the ancient Egyptians saw it with the flow of the Nile, they said this must be upper or north and this is lower or south. They looked at it through the flow of the Nile River. The Nile River was very important to Egypt. I go so far as to say that the Nile River was more important to Egypt than the Mississippi River is to what we call the United States. But we want to just look at this picture right here, and then we're going to, brothers and sisters, come back to this. But remember, ancient Egypt, Nubia, let's not forget Nubia. Then you got Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. And we know this land here is the Sinai. Sinai is mentioned in Exodus. Sinai is mentioned in other parts of the Bible. Sinai is mentioned inside of the Egyptian records. But the Sinai is east, brothers and sisters, of Egypt. And it goes north. Thutmose III of Dynasty 18 of Egypt went to the land of Canaan. Did you know that? Seti I of Dynasty 19 of Egypt went to the land of Canaan. Did you know that? Merneptah, the son of Ramses II, spoke of the land of Canaan. Did you know that? Where, if we were to go by the Bible, is the land of Canaan in relation with the land of Egypt? You have to go from where Abraham was in the land of Canaan since Genesis chapter 12, verse 6. By Genesis chapter 12, verse 10, Abraham is inside of Egypt. And it says he went down. La Redet. Let's go back there if we will, right? If we will. And there was a famine in the land, and Abraham went down. Why he Ra'ah be'eretz. Why Yered Abraham Mizraima. He did the Yared. Yarad, to go down, to go south, down south. That walk to go down into Egypt. Haho king, pluralized with the king. Haho king, la redet. This lamed, brothers and sisters, bold, not bold, bold, not bold, underline, not underline, if we will. This one, which we're going to even color code this one red for it to stand out, right? No, red. Excuse me. Turn red. Thank you. And we want to keep it like that for a reason. to go down. So if he was already in the land of Canaan, which is now later on called Palestine by Hadrian, that's why I wanted to go over the matter with Hadrian, right? He had to go down. So in layman terms, he went down south. So where's that land, brothers and sisters, in the Western Hemisphere? We all know the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Let's go on. Now here's a map. We're going to talk about this, if we will. Abraham's journeys, Isaac's journeys. See, Genesis 26 is where we read that Isaac is told to not to go down into Egypt. So he didn't. Isaac was told to dwell in the land called Gerar. Gerar is in the land of Canaan. You understand? So let's look at this. Abraham's journeys from Ur of Chaldea went up, went down, eventually continued to go down. Boom, goes into Egypt. We have On. You see that right there? On. The Greeks refer to that as Heliopolis. The Egyptians refer to it as Ayunu, I-U-N-U. Now, On is mentioned in Genesis as to be the place where Joseph's wife came from. Where is that in the Western Hemisphere? Are you telling me that the patriarchs, brothers and sisters, were in America? Did Joseph's wife that we read of, Asenat, called Isnit in Egyptian, if we will, that came from the land of Ainu or On, as we see right here on the map? Where is that in the West? Memphis. Don't tell me Tennessee. See, you can't look at ancient names that are now part of the Western Hemisphere by name, like Salem and others, and then sit there and say, see, this must be it. No, that's not it. And for the people who no disrespect intended are saying that the Red Sea is the Gulf of Mexico, no, it's not. To the people saying that the Red Sea is by California, no, it's not. Brothers and sisters, we are showing you right here on the map where that land is. Solomon in the Bible, in the book of Kings, had ships go from what's called Ezion Geber and will go down and will deal with animals, treaties with other nations. Did you know that some people say that the gold of Ophir is in modern day Zimbabwe of today? Are you aware that there are people who are saying, brothers and sisters, that Solomon dealt with trading with people in the Eastern African nations? So this is why we got to let the book speak for itself. So let's look at this. You have the Hittite Empire. Now, if we were to look here, Ramses of dynasty, 1819? One of them, either 18 or 19 dynasty, Ramses II, right? Dynasty 19, sorry. Because dynasty 18 is the Thutmoses and the Amenos. The 18th dynasty is generally called the Thutmoses and the Amenophis. And dynasty 19 is the Ramessids. But anyway, let's get back to this. In dynasty 19 of Egypt, Ramses is noted for fighting the Hittites. Now, if you're telling me that this is the same Egypt that the Bible always talks about, and you are saying that that's in America, where are the Hittites that's over in modern day Turkey fighting with Ramses in the Western Hemisphere? Because Ramses' body, even though we know those Hamites and those Egyptians did not want to be dug up, was found in the east. The body of Hatshepsut was found in the east. Let's go, brothers and sisters. The skulls of the tribe of Judah was found in the east. Let me repeat that again, brothers and sisters. All right? The skulls of the tribe of Judah was found in the east for edification purposes. The skulls of Judah was found, not in the west, if we will. Now, am I saying that throughout history that there were no Israelites in what we call North America of today? Of course, I'm not saying that, because Israel was scattered from one end of the earth to the other. But to say the land of Israel, not just the people, but the land of Israel itself is in the west, is why this video is being presented. You have the Euphrates River, mentioned in the book of Kings, mentioned in the book of Genesis. The Tigris River, Uruk, which is Erech. These Babylon, Uruk, or Erech, Sumer, called Shinar in the Bible, that was started as a kingdom by a Cushite named Nimrod. Nimrod is mentioned in J.A. Rogers' book, 100 Great Men of Color. Let us get into this. That's not in the Western Hemisphere. Nimrod is mentioned by J.A. Rogers in his book, 100 Great Men of Color. You understand? It is generally understood that either Amraphel or Chedorlaomer Omer is the same as Nimrod in the book of Genesis. That is in the land of brothers and sisters, the East, not the West, for edification purposes. Let us go on, if we will. Notes. Ethiopia is a translation of the Hebrew word Cush, which is derived from the Kosh, the Egyptian name of Nubia, beginning at the first cataract. Now, let's get into geography. As we said last week, we said we're going to talk about geography, right? Now, to the people who understood that this presentation was going to be done last night, I thank you for subscribing to the channel, and I apologize for being a day late. All right? But now let's look at this right here, brothers and sisters. It says Ethiopia is a translation of the Hebrew Cush, which is derived from the Kosh, the Egyptian name of Nubia, beginning at the first cataract. Why does that become important? Remember, I was asking y'all to remember Nubia that we see right here in this map? The word Nub meaning gold. The Bible talks about the gold in the land of Havilah and Cush being good in Genesis chapter 2, verse 10 to 13. Can you find that kind of gold over in the West? When the ancient Egyptians, we're going to go over, invaded or raided the ancient Ethiopians, they wanted their gold, so they can use it for their pharaohs, because the Egyptians didn't have the riches that Ethiopia had. The best coffee on earth comes out of Ethiopia. The Israelites, in part, went to Ethiopia. There's a video on this channel, or on the other channel, Mora Yeshaya History Lessons, called Simeon and Dan, in which, thank the Most High, I went over the aspects of Israel being scattered into African places and then brought over here to the West. But as we asked last week, if you're saying that the land of Israel, not the people of Israel, came over on their own or by via Atlantic slave trade, if you're saying that the land of Israel itself is in the west, how are you going to explain being cast out of your land, but you still no, that doesn't hold weight. So let's remember about Ethiopia, if you will, right there with that. Now let's look at this right here. Alexandria, Alexander the Third, aka Alexander the Great, the son of Philip of Macedon. The Bible in the book of Daniel speaks of Alexander as being the first king, meaning the first king that ruled over the people of Yawan. The Macedonians come from the people of Yawan, which come from the people of Japhet. J.C. DeGraff, in his book, he spoke by saying that when the Greeks came to power, the real Egyptians were happy because the Persians were tyrants. According to Herodotus, whom they call the so-called father of history. Of course, to the Greeks, he is that. All right. According to Herodotus, the ancient Persians used to bury their enemies alive. So they were not all the best of nicest of people. But let's look at this here: Egypt, Thebes, Alexandria, Karma, Meroe, Napata, Nubia. Why does this map become important? We spoke about the land of Israel, and it said eastward the country is bounded by Arabia, south is Egypt. But what is south of Egypt? As you keep on going south, you get to the Nubian desert, and then Napata and Meroe. By the time the Persian people done came to power, Meroe was the capital of what we call Kush of today, or Ethiopia of today. Brothers and sisters, there are people saying that Jerusalem is in Peru, in the Western Hemisphere. There are people saying that Jerusalem is in Utah of today. So this great river or this great sea, which I'm saying is the Mediterranean Sea, the greatest sea to Utah is the Pacific Ocean, because the word Yam means sea or ocean. So that means that not only is the book of Joshua, if that's the case, not only is the book of Joshua a lie, you're saying then that Josephus is a lie. Because according to the book of Josephus, Ptolemy the first, who called himself quote unquote Ptolemy Soda, took Israelites and shipped them from the land of Israel to Egypt. When you go into the book of Josephus, History of the Jews, book 13, where is Alexandria, Egypt, in the Western Hemisphere? Knowing that Alexandria that we see right here on the map was named in honor of Alexander, the son of Philip of Macedon, who came out of Macedon, which is north of Greece. Where is that in the West? Can we, no disrespect intended, see the folly in saying that the land of Israel is in the West? Look at this key map right here. North, south, east, west. Right here where it says Alexandria and Egypt, and that compass that you see above the word Sahara there on this picture. Pardon. Right? North, you get to Europe. South, you keep on going down to Sudan, Ethiopia, after Nubia. West, you're going to get into Libya, Algeria, later on Morocco. And east, you're going to get, according to this, Egypt, the Sinai, Arabian Peninsula. Where's that in the West, in the hemisphere? Nowhere. Now let's look at this one, for instance, brothers and sisters. Not going to spend much time on it, but just wanted to show north right there is the Mediterranean Sea, right? Egypt, Nubia, Semna. Right above the word Nubia is Semna. I'm going to type that in. All right. First, I'm going to type in the word Shalom. I don't want people to think, yo, is Josiah a Hamite on the low? He's always talking that stuff. No, I'm not a Hamite, brothers and sisters. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk about this Semna for a reason. Right? Semna, the Semna War. That's where the Egyptians celebrated taking over the Nubians. Semna War. It goes back to Dynasty 4 of Egypt, Dynasty 18 of Egypt. Let's talk, brothers and sisters, so we can understand what we're talking about. Because if you remember, we cited the scriptures first. And in citing the scriptures first, we spoke about our patriarch Abraham. We spoke about our patriarch Yitzchak or Isaac. We spoke about our patriarch Jacob, and we spoke about our patriarch Joseph. We identified that the Bible says that Joseph's wife, Asenath, is a daughter of the priest of On. On is mentioned in the Bible as well as shown on the map. Where is that in the West? Nowhere to be found. So these are things we just want to point out for reasonable purposes, if we will. Right? Let's go on, if we will. Notes. The Ethiopians ruled in Egypt during the era of Dynasty 25. There are two kings mentioned in the Bible who were rulers in Egypt, but were truly Ethiopian, Shabaka, Tirhaka. Shabaka is mentioned in 2 Kings 17. Tirhaka is mentioned in 2 Kings 19. That's in your Old Testament, brothers and sisters. Egyptians ruled their own land in Dynasty 26. Egypt was ruled by Persians in Dynasty 27 and 31. If you're saying, see what happens is this. They're looking at Egypt, brothers and sisters, and Ethiopia sometimes, and Canaan, Israel, fascinated by what they see, and then applying it to the West. See, you got to look at the East. Well, the pyramid there, it got the pyramid here. That was called Salem. There's Salem, Massachusetts. That's Canaan, Canaan Boulevard or whatever. Babylon, Babylon, Long Island. So you got to still look at the East and then try to sit there and say that it's truly in the West. Then you're not looking at the West to say that it's truly in the East. Earlier, my lady and I was at the store, and one of the people, now this is going east, the guy said that there's more imports from Asia than exports from the West going to Asia. It says that the sons of Japheth shall dwell in the tent of Shem. In Genesis, Japheth, the European, said that the sons of Japheth or the tent of Japheth shall dwell in the tent of Shem. So, of course, you're going to have to sit there and go to where Shem is in the east to get things for Japheth that migrated to the west. You understand? So let us go on and remember, Egypt was ruled by Persians in Dynasty 27 and Dynasty 31. Let's go on. Notes on the Nile. Let's go on, Israel. The Nile is about 66,650 kilometers long, and its drainage basin covers 11 countries: Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, formerly known as Zaire, Kenya, Ethiopia, Eritrea, South Sudan, Republic of the Sudan, and Egypt. In particular, the Nile is the primary source of Egypt and the Sudan. Let us remember that, brothers and sisters. The Nile is the primary water source of Egypt and Sudan. The Nile has two major tributaries, the White Nile and the Blue Nile. The White Nile is the headwaters and primary stream of the Nile itself. The Blue Nile, however, is the source of most of the water, containing 80% of the water and silt. The White Nile is longer and rises in the Great Lakes regions of Central Africa. Now, brothers and sisters, in the presentation we did before, if we will, we spoke about the Nile, called Yaor in the Hebrew, called Iteru by the Egyptians. This says that the Nile, blue and white one, is in Africa. Africa is part of the Eastern Hemisphere. Let's go on. With most distant source still undetermined, but located in either Rwanda or Burundi, it flows north through Tanzania, Lake Victoria, Uganda, and South Sudan. And we want to bold type that. The Blue Nile begins at Lake Tana in Ethiopia and flows into Sudan from the southeast. Right? Let us take the underline off and put it in bold. These lands, Ethiopia, Sudan, Egypt. Let's go back and look at this here. The Blue Nile begins at Lake Tana in Ethiopia. So we already see Africa mentioned in Ethiopia. We already went over the matter of the Nile in the past, if we will, brothers and sisters. Let's go on. Josephus, book 8, chapter 6, verse 5. Let's go on, Israel. Come on now. There was then a woman, queen of Egypt and Ethiopia. When this queen heard of the virtue and prudence of Solomon, she had a great mind to see him. And the reports that went every day abroad induced her to come to him. Now, we're not going to read this whole thing, but it says that this queen that went to see Solomon was the queen of Egypt and Ethiopia. Sheba was the place that this queen came from. But when did any one set people rule both Egypt and Ethiopia? Dynasty 18 for one. We already know by the time the northern kingdom fell, the northern kingdom of Israel, that Egypt was going through their 25th dynasty. What if I were to tell you that this queen of Egypt and Ethiopia was in Dynasty 18, said by some to be whom they call Queen Hatshepsut, the wife of Thutmose II of Dynasty 18, that went to see him? Some people state that in history. What if I were to tell you that Queen Hatshepsut of Dynasty 18 spoke about the Hyksos, who were expunged from Egypt decades before her by Amos of Dynasty 18, the brother of Kamos, the last king of Dynasty 17. But let's see what, according to this, she came to Jerusalem with great splendor and rich furniture, for she brought with her camels laden with gold, with several sorts of sweet spices, and with precious stones. Thutmose the first, the father of Thutmose the second, Thutmose the first, the father-in-law of Hatshepsut of Egypt, conquered Ethiopia. So this queen that came to see Solomon who was the queen of Egypt and Ethiopia, knowing a timeline. Many have stated that this queen was Queen Hatshepsut herself of Egypt, if we will. Now, if that is the case, then the Makeda brothers and sisters, who is said to be, quote, the Queen of Sheba, knowing Solomon would not have committed adultery by being with Thutmose, the second wife, would have, by according to many, been one of her servants, or like the Israelites have done in their own records in the scriptures, seen one of royalty and called them king or queen, just like we do today. Peace, king. Peace, my queen. How you doing? It's not that far-fetched. But let's go on about geography in this case, right? Matter of Hatshepsut of Egypt, Punt, or the God's land, was perhaps somewhat around today's Ethiopia. Hatshepsut sent a trading expedition to the land of Punt. Not only did the expedition come back alive, but also brought giraffes, animal skins, exotic animal skins, ivory, frankincense, and myrrh. The spoils guided Egyptologists to conclude that Punt was near Ethiopia. Based on the war stories, the Queen of Punt had greeted the expedition. She was drawn as very obese woman with elephantitis, and so does her daughter. The houses of the people are also shown as thatched roofs on stilts. This was the first time ever someone went to sub-Saharan Africa and came back and could record all they had seen. Now, let's look at this right here, right? If we will, brothers and sisters, right? It distinctly says that Hatshepsut sent a trading expedition to the land of Punt. Now, according to many, as we just read, it says the spoils guided Egyptologists to conclude that Punt was near Ethiopia. You know what some people call the land of Punt today? P-U-N-T? Somalia. Somalia, brothers and sisters, is near Ethiopia. So when we speak on these lands and these places and so forth, it's not far-fetched. Let's go on, if we will. All right? Now let's look at this here. The slippers of Tut of Dynasty 18. The chess box of Tut of Dynasty 18. Let's look at the slippers on the right-hand side carefully. What do you see? Who is on that slipper? If not a Cushite with a yoke around his neck as a rope? Who on the chess box of King Tut was he attacking, if not the Cushites? Now, King Tut or Tutankhamun of Dynasty 18 is the relative of Akhenaten the fourth. Akhenaten was written off by Horemheb of Egypt. How does all of this tie in? Because we just went over the fact that Abraham, Joseph, Jacob went to Egypt. You don't think they knew what was going on in Egypt at that particular time? You don't think Abraham knew to tell his wife, don't say you my wife, say you my sister. because those men sleep with other men's wives. Now, the Kemetic community comes to Israelites to say that Abraham went to Africa with a lie. To that, I ask this. Taking the story from the Bible itself. Your guest comes to your country, and the relative that's a female of your guest, who's also your guest, is taken to the back room. That's how Cush, or pardon me, Kemet got down. It was custom in the culture of the Egyptians, yeah, believe it or not. When people would come through, they would sit there and sleep with the woman in the back room. Did you know that one of the plagues of Egypt was flies? Did you know that the Pharaoh Pepi of Dynasty 4, pardon me, Dynasty 6, I stand corrected. Pharaoh Pepi of Dynasty 6 used to put honey on his slaves just so the flies would stay on them and not on the Pharaoh himself? So we might be able to see why flies became a plague to the Egyptians. It's coming back upon you. Be it Shem, Ham, or Japheth, the things you do come back upon you as a people. We Israelites teach that all the time about the story of the Israelites. But let's look at this here. You have in Dynasty 18, Cushites shown being killed in Egypt. And we're going to, brothers and sisters, I want to show it with this particular matter, if we will. Right? The chest box of Thut of Dynasty 18. Let's cut that part out, if we will, right? Who memorializes showing black people killing others? Crips, Bloods, when they take their bandanas and then tie it on top of the antenna of their car as they used to. Who, brothers and sisters, you can sit there and type Michael Brown, who was killed by the white police officer, and still see him on the ground bleeding. America memorializes black men getting killed. You can type black people getting sicked on by dogs and see it shown during the civil rights era. What, brothers and sisters, was Thutmose showing, or pardon me, Tut showing with the dogs, if you're looking at the picture there? Dogs, animals being sicked on and attacking black people. Now, of course, we know those are different black nations. Not all people of color or all black people are the same people. But we want to point that out for reasonable purposes. Let's go on. The Kawa Temple. Kawa is a site in Sudan, located between the third and fourth cataracts of the Nile on the east bank of the river, across from Dongola. In ancient times, it was the site of several temples to the Egyptian god A, built by the Egyptian rulers Amenhotep III and Tutankhamun, and by Taharqa and other Kushite kings. We want to point out that Amenhotep III was in Dynasty 18, and Taharqa was in Dynasty 25. So we got several dynasties, including what they refer to as the third intermediate period between Amenhotep III, who was Egyptian, and Taharqa, who was a Cushite, even mentioned in the Bible in 2 Kings 19, also mentioned inside of the Egyptian records too. Right? Let's look at this. The Kawa Temple is in the Sudan. So let us look at the third and fourth cataract of the Nile. We see here Sudan, right? Khartoum, Meroe, Napata. We went over that, right? You see here the number 3, and then you see the number 4 by where Napata is on the map. So that's where the Kawa temple was. Where is that in the west? See, you got to look at Egypt in the east to try to say, well, it's truly over here. Egypt, nor Israel, is truly over here. Now, why did I, brothers and sisters, talk about Cush, Kosh, so much? Because of this map that we just passed over here. Ethiopia, Sudan, Nubia. Did you know that the Sudan of today was part of the Kushite Empire, and part of Sudan was part of the Egyptian Empire? And that the land core that today was actually shared by both Ethiopians and Egyptians, sometimes in peace, sometimes not in peace. But brothers and sisters, to the Israelites that are saying that Israel, the land, and Egypt, the land, is in the west, where is Cush? Where is Cush? Whether with a C or a K. It's not in the west. And we already talking about aspects of Cush by Egypt. Egypt, south of Canaan. Abraham went to the land of Canaan. Where is Ur of Chaldees in the west? Brothers and sisters saying that the land of Israel is in the west. There's a lot of information that is not going to be addressed when you're saying that Israel, the land, and Egypt, the land, is in the west, Western Hemisphere. Such as, where is Cush? We spoke earlier on this for a reason. The Nile River in Ethiopia. Where is Ethiopia? Where is Cush? Where's the beginning of the Nile? If all of this has been noted, and we read of the Nile, brothers and sisters, inside of the aspect in the Bible in Genesis 41, as we did last time. So you got to be able to address all of that, brothers and sisters. Let's go on. All right. Show this picture right here already. Let's go. Notes on Dynasty 28 and Nubia. Right. During the 28th dynasty, the southern province of Nubia extended to the district of Napata in the Sudan of today. It had two regions. One was south of Thebes, and the other was at Cush in Koroi. Some say it as Karo. Okay. The traditional ancient Egyptian name for Nubia was Ta-Seti, land of the bow, as in bow and arrow. Indeed, the Egyptians gave that same name to their southernmost nome, which bordered on Nubia, either because it was adjacent to the country or else because that portion in southern Upper Egypt was originally part of the earlier kingdom of Nubia with the same name, and which would have existed before the unification of Egypt. Now, whether you're talking about the unification of Egypt with Namer, which they refer to like as Dynasty 1, or the unification of Egypt under Mentuhotep in Dynasty 11, that's another matter. But let's go on here. We want to bold type this. Horemheb was the last king of Dynasty 18. However, and we want to bold, let's just bold this, all right? However, he was before that a general who was of Egyptian people but was in Syria. Horemheb of Dynasty 18, an Egyptian man who later on became an Egyptian pharaoh, was a general for the Egyptians inside of Syria. Syria is in the east. Amenhotep I invaded Cush. So now That's something we want to point out for reasonable purposes. Let's go on if we will. Thank you for that. Let's look at this here. These are Cushites shown, brothers and sisters, on Egyptian walls. Well, needless to say, they're black, not trying to be funny. But that's not the point in this case. The point is this to the Israelites who are saying that the land of Israel, and also saying that the land of Egypt is in the Western Hemisphere. Where do you get the Cushites in this? Is the question I'm asking. You understand? All right. Let's go on if we will. Notes. The yearly inundation is caused by the summer monsoon rains outside of Egypt in the mountains of Ethiopia and southern Sudan. The rainfall in Egypt in ancient times was not much. The overflow of the Nile is what was relied on. The Kesbed was from the Sinai, and it was gems and stones. So what am I pointing out right here? What the Egyptians refer to as the Kesbed is gems and stones that they will go into the Sinai, into where the mountains was in the Sinai, and dig into the mountains to get these gems and stones, if you will. The animals were brought to Egypt, such as the horse from Asia. Now, many times people state that the Hyksos were the ones who introduced the animal called the horse to the Egyptians. Some people say that the horse was brought to Egypt and a chariot was used by the Egyptians before said time. Whether or not the Hyksos brought it, it was still brought to them from Asiatic people, if we will. Even if these Asiatic nations were from the biblical people of Shem or the biblical people of Ham. The Egyptians were introduced to the animal called the horse from the Asiatics. Let's go on. The American lion, now extinct. The Ethiopian lion was used in Egypt on the Nakara, and of course, in the Levant area. Lions are not native to Egypt. Lions are not native to the land of Israel. Lions are native to Ethiopia. So when you look at the first dynasty of Egypt, with Namir and then Aha and all those other, AHA was one of the pharaohs of Egypt, right? And you look at what they call the Nakara, that image of the lion was brought to their brothers and sisters by the Cushites. And so we can get an understanding. This is how the Cushites look, as tribute bearers, as they were called. And we already showed King Tut's shoe or slipper. So let's go on, if we will, to the next part, all right? Deuteronomy 11. For the land, whether thou goest in to possess it, is not as the land of Egypt from whence ye came out, where thou didst sow thy seed and didst water it with thy foot as a garden of herbs. They dealt with a lot of footwork inside of Egypt, as was known and shown by that. Right? If you're saying Egypt, my Israelite brother, is in the West, where are people having to use their feet in that regard, as Deuteronomy here describes this? But the land of Israel is described as the following. But the land whither thou goest over to possess it is a land of hills and valleys, and drinketh the water as the rain of heaven cometh down. A land which the Lord thy God careth for, the eyes of Yah thy God are always upon it from the beginning of the year even unto the end of the year. So now let's look at this. Brothers and sisters, the land of Israel, which was formerly known as the land of Canaan, right? It says that the eyes of the Most High are upon it from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. So now when we go, brothers and sisters, to the book of 2 Kings 17, and it distinctly says the Most High moved Israel out of his sight, it's talking about meaning from them being in the land. Not that he doesn't look at anywhere else on earth. But when it says that Israel was removed out of his sight, it's talking about from the land that he looks at from the beginning to the end of the year. That's what we want to point out in that regard. Let's go on, if you will, to the next slide. Zechariah chapter 14. And if the family of Egypt go not up and come not, they shall have no overflow. There shall be the plague wherewith the Lord will smite the nations that go not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. This shall be the punishment of Egypt, and the punishment of all the nations that go not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Now let's look at this, brothers and sisters. Right? Pardon me, I wanted to drink some sorrow. Wa'in mishpakat Mitzrayim, lo ta'ale, walo ba'a, walo alehem. Tikyeh, hamagefa, asher yigaf yorewahe et hagoyim, asher lo ya'alu, lakog et kag hasukot. The Feast of Booths, also known as the Feast of Tabernacles. In the Gregorian calendar, usually comes in sometime in September. All right, let's go on. Zotiye chatat Mitzrayim wa katat kal hagoyim asher lo ya'alu lakag et kag hasukot. Now, why did I want to go over this? Is because of this. Ta'ale. See this word right here? We're going to show this in the green for a reason. We're going to show this word here, brothers and sisters, in the blue for a reason. Let's go all the way back, if we will, right? And I was saying to remember certain things for a reason. La redet, bold, to go down, right? Looking at this here. Wayered, Abram, bold. Abraham went down. To the south lies Egypt. So they would have to go from the south of Canaan in the land of Egypt to go north. Zechariah in the Bible, right? It is distinctly saying this, as we just read in Zechariah chapter 14. Sorry about that. This shall be the punishment of Egypt and the punishment of all the nations that go not up. They got to go north to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Now let's look at this here in the Hebrew. Ta'ale and Wayered. Yarad, I wanted to point something else out, brothers and sisters. Let's go back, if we will, right? Pardon that. Let's look. Remember this here, and we're going to show this, if we will. Now, we're not going to use yellow. We're going to use a color that's going to stand out. Green in this case. I wanted to make sure the letter Yod was inside of it. Pardon me. All right, maybe it doesn't like that. Let's try red. Let's look at it like this, brothers and sisters. All right. Now, what we're going to do is take it from here in that regard, right? Please bear with me with this. Thank you for your patience. And let's look at that like that there, if we will, brothers and sisters, in the blue background. Hayaradain, the Jordan. Yarad, Yarad, Yered. Now let's go all the way back here and remember that the Jordan goes from the north to the south. So now when we look at Yarad, the verb Yarad, brothers and sisters, we're going to type this in here, right? The verb Yarad means to go down or to descend. The word here, Allah or Galah, with a soft G-like sound, if we will, right? This means here to go up. So now when we read here about the families in Zechariah going up, and when then we read about Isaac being told not to go down, and we read of the children of Israel going down, Yarad in root, in Isaiah chapter 30 to Egypt. Point in all of that is this. It shows you the geography. To go from where the Israelites were in their land to Egypt, you had to go south. To go from where the land of Egypt was to where Israel was, you had to go north. That's what we want to point out. So where is all of that north and south and going up and going down in the Western Hemisphere? Because you got people still saying Peru is in Jerusalem. So then where's Egypt? And if Egypt is in the west, then where's Cush? Because the Egyptians spoke about the Cushites in Dynasty 4, Dynasty 18. Merneptah spoke about them. Manetho spoke about that to the Greeks. Herodotus spoke about the Ethiopians and it being south of where Egypt was. So what map are these guys using? It doesn't coincide with the book of Joshua, with the western and eastern part of the Jordan, as we went over. It doesn't coincide with the Hamite lands, and it does not coincide with the Shemite lands, brothers and sisters. Let's go on. So that's what we want to point out with the Ta'ale, that root word Allah there, and Wayered, that tau, and this we're going to show. All right, let's do it like this. We're going to show the prefixes in a different color, even though yes, it is part of the word. All right, let's do this. And we want to show this in red. All right. And we want to show this in red. Now, what I'm showing in red, bless, are the prefixes. So if you just look at the ayin, lamed, and hey, the yod, the resh, and the dalit, yod, resh, dalit, yarad, Yarden, Jordan River, Hayarden, it goes south. As we shown the Jordan River earlier, the Jordan River divides the land of Israel between west and east. We went over the word Yam, meaning sea, and Yamah, meaning west. So west of the land of Israel by Thucydides, west of the land of Israel by the book of Numbers 34, you're going to get to the Mediterranean. So we're showing biblical and other sources to collaborate our points. Let us close out, brothers and sisters, and let the book speak for itself. Ezekiel 29. Son of man, set thy face against Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and prophesy against him and against all Egypt. Speak and say, thus saith the Most High, behold, I am against thee, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, the great dragon that lieth in the midst of his rivers, that has said, my river is my own, and I have made it for myself. Brothers and sisters, this river is called here Yaor. Yaor is not like Nahar, meaning river, but as we went over before, the Yaor is the Hebrew way of the Egyptian Iteru. The Iteru of the Egyptian is talking about the Nile. Where is that in the West? Joseph was never in Brooklyn. Abraham was never in Utah. It tells you it came from Ur Chaldees, went north to where Haran was, and went then south into where Canaan was. You can't show that inside of the Western Hemisphere. That's why we wanted to let the book speak. And we're going to close out on this one right here. Ezekiel 29. Let the book speak, giving honor to the Most High. Therefore, behold, I am against thee and against thy rivers, and I will make the land of Egypt utterly waste and desolate, from Migdol to Syene, even unto the border of Ethiopia. So the Egyptians spoke about Cush or Ethiopia. You see this word right here we're going to highlight? That in Hebrew, all right, we're going to put this again in red because red seems to be the color that stands out when I'm trying to highlight the matter, right? When you look at this right here, let's do this correctly to the best of one's ability and close out. But I think and understand that people understand the point, giving honor to Yah. We're going to read this again. Now, this is talking about the land of Egypt in the east, right? In Ezekiel 29, Ezekiel being a captive in Babylon. Babylon already by this point had defeated Assyria. The Assyrian king spoke about defeating Tirhaka as we went over in the previous presentation on this subject. What does it say here? Ezekiel 29. Therefore, behold, I am against thee and against thy rivers, and I will make the land of Egypt utterly waste and desolate, from Migdal to Syene, even unto the border of Ethiopia. So my Israelite brother, who is saying that the land of Israel and the land of Egypt is in the west, when did this prophecy in Ezekiel 29 come to pass, even to the border of Cush, shown there highlighted in the red, translated as Ethiopia? You can't show Ethiopia in the Western Hemisphere. Giving honor and praise unto Yah, the creator, maker of heaven and earth. Shalom. There will be another presentation on this because it's become a plague in a fake book world. And we want to show with the living book, the scriptures, what it's talking about. Shalom. To the people who participated, shared, liked, commented, let us do that. Somebody asked the question, what lands do Yah say that we will be gathered from? And are we to say, like, are we in those lands? All right, to the brother, I'm assuming brother by the name Eric Miller, the Most High said that he will gather Israel from one end of the earth to the other in the book of Isaiah 49. You can read that in Isaiah. I'm typing the part there. The part, Isaiah 49. It's on that. So hopefully that answered your question. All right. Giving honor and praise to the Most High. Shalom.